Imagine, like, surviving the most harrowing, oppressive experience of your entire life. Let's say you've been living under a brutal, authoritarian regime.
Right. Absolute worst case scenario.
Exactly. You have no agency, no rights, and your daily existence is just defined by fear. Then, against all odds, you are liberated. The regime
Oh,
falls.
wow.
Yeah. You are let out into freedom, and you're given every resource you need to start a new life. Logically, you should be euphoria incarnate. I mean, you should be ready to conquer the world.
You definitely think so, yeah.
But human psychology rarely follows logic. What if, at the very first sign of a new obstacle, your mind just snaps back to that old terror?
Hmm.
What if your instinct isn't to fight for your new freedom, but to literally accuse your rescuer of actually trying to destroy you?
Well, it's a profound cognitive dissonance. When someone's baseline reality has been defined by trauma and, subjugation for generations, a sudden shift to freedom doesn't just erase that conditioning.
It's not an overnight fix.
Right, not at all. The body and the mind are still wired for the worst-case scenario. You aren't just fighting external obstacles anymore. You're fighting the architecture of your own traumatized brain.
Which perfectly sets the stage for today. Welcome to another custom-tailored deep dive. You know who you are, the endlessly curious learner listening right now.
The ones who want to get past the surface-level summaries.
Exactly. You want to really understand the hidden mechanisms of history, leadership, and human behavior. And today, our mission is exploring what might be, honestly, the ultimate masterclass in crisis management and psychological reprogramming.
It really is. We're looking at a bilingual Hebrew-English document of the Book of Deuteronomy.
And we're going to examine Moses not just as like a historical figure, but as a leader trying to manage the severe psychological whiplash of the ancient Israelites. He's taking them from a paralyzed, fearful group of refugees to a nation capable of actual self-governance.
This text is just endlessly fascinating because it operates on so many different levels. I mean, it is a foundational legal document, sure. But beneath that, it is this desperate, brilliant attempt by a leader to reconstruct the worldview of an entire population. And he does it using rhetoric, architecture, and highly specific psychological interventions.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand the specific genius of Moses' leadership, we first really have to understand the sheer logistical nightmare he was facing.
Oh, that was a nightmare.
Yeah, because the popular image is, a guy standing on a mountain with stone tablets acting as a spiritual guru. But in reality, he is managing a massive, migrating city-state of newly emancipated slaves who have zero infrastructure.
Zero.
And in Chapter 1 of our source text, The Facade Cracks, we see him hit a very real, very human breaking point.
He basically hits a wall of sheer administrative overload. The text notes that the population has exploded. They are as the stars of heaven for multitude.
That's a lot of people.
Right, and Moses makes this incredibly vulnerable admission for an ancient leader. He basically tells the people, how can I myself alone bear your cumbrance and your burden and your strife?
Cumbrance, burden, and strife. That is a brilliantly polite translation for what was probably absolute chaos.
Absolute chaos.
I mean, you have hundreds of thousands of people who have never had to resolve their own civil disputes because, well, a master always did it for them with a whip. Now, every single argument, every property dispute, every accusation is falling on one guy's shoulders.
Which forces him to fundamentally redesign their society. He knows he can't just be the bottleneck for justice anymore.
So what does he do?
He implements a massive delegation of authority. He commands the tribes to bring forward individuals who are wise men and understanding and full of knowledge. And from there, he builds this highly structured judicial and military hierarchy, captains of thousands, captains of hundreds, captains of 50s, and captains of 10s.
It's a complete organizational restructuring, like a modern startup scaling up overnight. But what stands out here isn't just the org chart. It's the moral baseline he insists upon for this new system.
Yeah, that's the crucial part.
He is laying down the core principles of fair judgment for people who have, frankly, only ever known systemic injustice. In chapters 1 and 16, he outlines these non-negotiable rules. First, there's absolute equality. He says, "Ye shall hear the small and the great alike."
And that alone is a radical departure from the ancient world where your status often dictated the verdict.
Totally.
Second, he demands impartiality and courage. The judges are commanded not to respect persons or be afraid of the face of any man. They basically cannot let intimidation sway the law.
I want to look closely at the third principle, though, because it reveals a deep understanding of human cognition. He issues a strict prohibition against bribery. But he doesn't just say, bribery's bad, don't do it.
Right, he explains the why.
Exactly. The text says, "For a gift doth blind the eyes of the wise and pervert the words of the righteous."
That is just a phenomenal insight into cognitive bias. Moses isn't just worried about corrupt, evil people taking bribes. He specifically says it blinds the wise and the righteous.
Well, even the good guys.
Exactly. The psychological mechanism here is that once you accept a gift, you feel an unconscious reciprocal obligation. The bribe doesn't just alter the verdict, it actually alters the judge's perception of reality. They literally cannot see the truth of the case anymore.
To safeguard against that, Moses establishes the ultimate capstone of this legal architecture. He tells these new judges, for the judgment is God's. But let me challenge this setup for a second.
Sure.
If you tell a newly appointed middle manager, or in this case, a captain of tens, that their daily rulings are actually the judgments of God, doesn't that introduce just a terrifying amount of pressure? I mean, how do you even function under that kind of weight?
Well, it does amplify the gravity, absolutely, but it
Wow.
purposefully strips away the judge's ego. The point Moses is making is that justice isn't subjective.
Right.
The judge is not the author of the law. They are merely the custodian of an objective truth. When you realize you are executing a standard higher than yourself, it removes the temptation to bend the rules for your own personal gain or, popularity.
Which brings us to a really compelling feature in the original Hebrew text from chapter 16 that perfectly distills this mindset. The phrase is tzedek, kereta turdov, which translates to justice, justice shalt thou follow.
And the repetition there is key. In biblical Hebrew, repeating a word isn't just an aesthetic choice. It is a structural mechanism for absolute emphasis.
Like putting it in all caps.
Exactly. By saying tzedek, tzedek, Moses is effectively bolding, highlighting, and underlining the concept. He is telling them that justice is the absolute bedrock of their survival. If the justice system rots, the entire society collapses.
So on paper, Moses builds this brilliant decentralized architecture of justice.
Right.
But a blueprint is only as good as the people executing it. The people now have a flawless legal framework, but their internal programming is still a huge mess.
Oh, completely.
There is this staggering psychological disconnect between the physical reality they are experiencing and the beliefs they are harboring in their minds.
The whiplash is genuinely tragic. To understand their mindset, you really have to look at their baseline. In Egypt, they survived what the text calls the iron furnace.
The iron furnace. Such a brutal image.
It was brutal, generational subjugation. But then they witnessed God's mighty hand and outstretched arm. They saw empires collapse. They saw massive signs and wonders to secure their freedom.
And the miracles didn't stop at the border of Egypt either. Moses explicitly reminds them of the ongoing daily anomalies they are living through.
Right, the wilderness provision.
Yeah, for decades in the wilderness, their clothes didn't wear out, their shoes didn't disintegrate. When they were in a parched desert, they were given water from a flint rock. The environment should have killed them 100 times over, yet they are perfectly sustained.
Yet, instead of developing profound resilience from that, they consistently collapse into paralyzing unbelief. And I think the most glaring example of this disconnect is their navigation system.
Oh, the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night.
Yeah, let's consider the sensory reality of that for a second. The daytime cloud was a visible, constant shield and guide, but the pillar of fire at night is even more profound.
Because the desert at night is terrifying.
Exactly. An ancient desert at night is a void. It is completely disorienting, freezing, and full of predators. The text notes the fire was specifically there to show you by what way you should go. To have a towering, divine fire actively guiding your steps means you are never truly lost and you are never unprotected in the dark.
You literally have a divine lighthouse walking in front of you, which makes their reaction completely baffling.
It really does.
Here's where it gets really interesting. In chapter 1, Moses recounts them sitting in their tents complaining and literally saying, "Because the Lord hated us, he hath brought us forth out of the land of Egypt to deliver us into the hand of the Amorites to destroy us."
Yeah.
Help me make sense of this. How does a population that is being fed, clothed, and guided by a supernatural fire convince themselves that their rescuer actually despises them and is actively plotting their murder?
This is where we see the textbook mechanics of trauma response. Miracles change a person's environment, but they don't instantly rewire a hypervigilant nervous system.
The iron furnace conditioning.
Exactly. These people were conditioned in that furnace.
Mm-hmm.
When your entire life has been defined by an abuser, in this case, Pharaoh and the Egyptian Empire, you are conditioned to expect cruelty.
Right.
So when they encounter a new, terrifying obstacle like the heavily fortified Amorites, their brains just short circuit. They project the malice of their past abusers onto their present rescuer. Their fear overrides their recent memory of the miracles, and they default to their deepest trauma, which is, we are expendable and we are going to die.
And that projection is the catalyst for the entire disaster that follows. Their fear isn't just a fleeting emotion. It dictates their actions and derails their entire timeline.
It absolutely does.
Rather than looking at this as a list of separate historical events, let's trace the cause and effect of this psychological collapse chronologically. It begins right after they leave Mount Sinai and arrive at the border of the Promised Land, a place called Kadesh Barnea.
Kadesh Barnea is the critical juncture. They are right at the threshold. God tells them clearly to go up and possess the land. It's supposed to be the culmination of their escape.
But instead of moving forward, the leadership stalls.
Right. The people approach Moses and demand to send spies ahead to map out the route and assess the cities.
Which, on the surface, that sounds like prudent military strategy, like basic reconnaissance. But based on the text, it seems more like an avoidance mechanism born out of sheer anxiety.
Precisely. It's avoidance, and that sets the trap. The spies return and confirm the land is incredibly fertile. I mean, they literally bring back massive clusters of fruit.
Right, the good news.
But then they deliver the fatal blow to the Israelites' fragile psychology. They say the inhabitants are giants, and the cities are fortified up to heaven. The result is immediate paralysis.
The people literally say, our brethren have made our heart to melt.
Yes. The fear contagion just spreads through the entire camp. They openly refuse to cross the border.
And this paralyzing fear isn't an isolated incident either. Moses takes the time to confront them with their own historical rap sheet of unbelief. He brings up the golden calf.
Oh, the ultimate panic move.
Exactly. A moment of sheer existential panic where the second Moses was out of sight on the mountain, they reverted to idol worship just to have something tangible to control. He also mentions places with names like Taberah, Massa, and Kibroth Hattava.
And those specific locations represent a pattern of catastrophic impatience.
How so?
Well, at Taberah, they complained so bitterly about their hardships that fire broke out. At Massa, they aggressively tested God because they lacked water, essentially threatening a mutiny.
Right.
And at Kibroth Hattava, they were consumed by a craving for meat, rejecting the divine provision they already had. It's just a continuous loop. Whenever a physical need is delayed or a threat appears, their trust completely evaporates.
So, at Kadesh Barnea, this pattern hits its apex. They refuse to go in. God condemns that generation, stating that because of this ultimate unbelief, they will wander the wilderness until that entire generation passes away.
40 years.
40 years. And this triggers perhaps the most bizarre psychological pivot in the whole narrative. The moment they realize they've lost the opportunity, they experience a wild overcorrection.
It's fascinating. They swing violently from absolute paralyzing cowardice to arrogant presumption. Suddenly they declare, we have sinned against the Lord, we will go up and fight.
But that's not real courage, is it? I mean, it's a frantic, panic-induced attempt to undo the consequences of their actions. God explicitly warns them through Moses, go not up. Neither fight lest ye be smitten before your enemies.
Because the divine presence is no longer with that specific military endeavor.
Right. But they go anyway.
Yeah, they ignore the warning, grab their weapons, and charge into the hill country entirely on their own power. And it is a spectacular failure. They are routed and chased down by the Amorites. They basically assumed courage was just a switch they could flip when it was convenient. But without the foundation of actual trust, it was just hollow, self-destructive bravado.
And that single, disastrous overcorrection locks in the consequence. The result is almost 40 years of wandering, a massive, painful holding pattern, while an entirely new generation grows up.
A generation that hasn't been mentally broken by the iron furnace of Egypt.
Exactly. And the narrative does eventually find its resolution, but it takes nearly 4 decades. We see this new generation finally start making progress. They defeat the hostile kings Sihon and Og.
Right. Those were major victories.
Yeah. And they learn restraint, too, passing safely by the territories of Esau and Moab because they are explicitly commanded not to provoke them. Ultimately, they arrive on the plains of Moab, just across the Jordan River from Jericho.
And this is the staging ground. This is where Moses sets up 3 cities of refuge, establishing civil order, and prepares to transfer leadership to Joshua.
But keeping that massive traumatized population intact and moving forward for 40 years is an almost inconceivable feat of leadership. I mean, Moses didn't have social media or a communications department. He had his own voice.
That's all he had.
How did he linguistically reprogram a people who oscillated so violently between terror and arrogance?
Well, he had to become a master of persuasive rhetoric. And if you analyze his speeches in Deuteronomy, his primary weapon against their trauma is memory.
Memory.
Yes. Trauma naturally fragments memory. It makes you fixate on the current threat and delete the past victories. To counter this, Moses constantly deploys the commands to remember and forget not.
Oh, okay.
He forces them to recall being bondmen in Egypt, to remember the specific ways they provoked God, and to remember exactly how they were rescued. He essentially acts as the external hard drive for their collective memory.
He's forcing them to look at the data of their own survival. And he couples that with the brutal dismantling of their ego. Right?
Yes, very brutal.
Right before they cross the Jordan, he anticipates their arrogance. He tells them point blank, "Speak not thou in thy heart, for my righteousness the Lord hath brought me in to possess this land."
Don't get a big head, basically.
Exactly. He essentially says, you aren't getting this land because you are morally superior. In fact, you are a stiff-necked people. It's incredibly harsh.
It is tough love, designed to destroy the illusion of self-sufficiency that led to their disastrous defeat years earlier. But the genius of Moses is that he balances this severe reality check with intensely emotive parental language.
Right. He doesn't just tear them down.
No, he contextualizes their suffering.
Yeah.
He reminds them that God carried them through the wilderness as a man doth bear his son.
I love that. And he uses this breathtaking imagery in his final song in chapter 32. He compares God to an eagle. The text says, "As an eagle that stirreth up her nest, hovereth over her young, spreadeth abroad her wings, taketh them, beareth them on her pinions."
That metaphor is so precise.
How so?
An eagle will literally tear up the comfortable lining of its own nest, exposing the thorns, to make it so uncomfortable that the chicks are forced to step out and learn to fly. To the chick, this feels like an attack. It is terrifying.
Right.
But the eagle hovers right there, ready to catch them on its wings if they fall. Moses is reframing their entire 40-year struggle here. The wilderness wasn't a punishment meant to destroy them, it was the stirring of the nest. They had to be pushed out of their slave mentality so they could learn to fly as a free people.
So what does this all mean for how they were supposed to absorb this message? We see another brilliant linguistic tool Moses uses to try and pierce through their stubbornness. It's the famous Hebrew command used repeatedly in the text, Shema Yisrael, hear, O Israel.
Shema is arguably the most vital word in his rhetorical arsenal.
Why is that?
When Moses says Shema, he isn't asking for quiet in the room. He isn't saying, listen to the sound of my voice. In biblical Hebrew, Shema implies an existential, active absorption of reality. It means to hear, to internalize that truth, and to let it fundamentally change your behavior.
Wow.
He's demanding this level of engagement from a people who have spent decades actively ignoring reality.
He's saying, don't just hear the words, let the words rewrite your corrupted code.
Beautifully put, yes.
This entire journey we've traced today is a staggering testament to the difficulty of change. I mean, we started with Moses bearing the impossible cumbrance of a traumatized society, resulting in the brilliant architecture of a justice system built on pure impartiality.
Right, the tzedek. And we examined the deep psychological disconnect of a people who could stare at a pillar of divine fire and still project their own trauma onto it, convinced they were hated.
We followed that tragic cause and effect narrative, from the paralyzing fear at the border of Kadesh Barnea to the panicked false bravado that led to their defeat, all the way through a 40-year holding pattern designed to let a new mindset grow.
And finally, we saw the poetic, forceful rhetoric Moses used, demanding that they shema, that they remember their history, and that they realize they were being carried on the wings of an eagle the entire time.
Bringing this back to you, the listener, there is a deeply practical application here. We all navigate our own version of the wilderness.
We really do.
We all face moments where a new challenge triggers an old trauma, making us blind to the resources and the pillars of fire we already have right in front of us. Moses' final speeches are a masterclass in resilience. You cannot survive the future if you allow fear to erase the memory of your past victories. You have to actively command yourself to remember.
Because if you don't understand the mechanisms of why you failed in the past, you are absolutely doomed to repeat the loop. And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought about the man who orchestrated this entire societal shift.
Moses himself. Yeah. Moses spends 40 agonizing years bearing the burdens of this volatile group. He builds their laws, he suffers their rebellions, and he meticulously programs them for success. But he does all of this knowing an incredibly painful truth. God has told him he will not be allowed to cross the Jordan River.
Right.
In the final chapters, Moses ascends Mount Nebo. He looks out over the Promised Land from afar, and he dies there.
He spends his entire life building the foundation for a home he knew he would never be allowed to enter.
Exactly. He absorbed the chaos so the next generation could inherit the peace. So think about the legacy you're constructing right now. In your work, your community, your family, are you willing to plant trees, to painstakingly water and nurture them day after day, knowing full well you will never be the one to sit in their shade? That is the true architecture of leadership. Keep planting those trees. We'll see you on the next deep dive.